So I recently created this medieval fantasy character with no particular goal in mind other than just practicing my pixel art. But as soon as this guy was there on my screen, it made me think of all these nice good old point and click adventure games back from the 90s that I grew up with, which usually involved a lot of walking around between locations, sometimes even through beautiful screens that offered nothing else but just walking from one end to the other. Yes, I'm looking at you, Simon the Sorcerer Part 1. So I thought, let's bring this guy to life and create a walk cycle animation that is typical for these kind of point and click adventure games. Which means no overly dynamic run animation that you would need for a, let's say, 2D platformer game, but more a relaxed walk that is hopefully pleasant to look at for a longer period of time while you explore the game world, solve some puzzles and have nice conversations with the other characters in your game. And while this is not the first time ever that I attempted to create a walking animation like this, it has definitely been quite some time since I last did it on some of my hobby projects, and I definitely do not consider myself an expert on these kind of walk cycle animations. In fact, it has been so long ago that I didn't even find any of my past attempts to show you here, but probably I have them still somewhere on some old backup drives, so if I ever find them I might make a video on those too. But nonetheless, I remembered a few things to keep in mind while creating a walk cycle animation, and I'm going to share those with you now so that maybe they help you with your own character walking animations. So the first thing that really helps with creating the individual frames of the animation, especially with a character of this size, is to have a few horizontal lines in place that you can use as guidelines to keep the proportions of the character intact. Otherwise, especially when you are just starting out with creating larger characters and animation, it is very easy to end up with arms and legs being too short or too long, the head being too big, etc. So having those lines with a distance from each other that is roughly the size of the character's head and placing the center line around the hip of the character helps with maintaining the character's proportions overall. So then I started with 4 different frames for the animation, and those 4 frames already capture the entire loop. And refining the animation later on to look more smooth is then a question of adding more frames in between those existing 4 frames. So the 4 initial frames capture the following 4 stages of the walking animation. So we have one frame with both legs and arms close to the character's torso, with the front leg being in a forward motion and the front arm being in a backward motion. So it's important to always have these things going in opposite directions. Otherwise it would look very unnatural, and this is not how humans walk. So then we have another frame where the front leg has already moved forward and the front arm has already moved backward. So then again we have another frame with both legs and arms close to the character's torso, but with the front leg being in a backward motion and the front arm being in a forward motion. And finally a 4th frame with the front leg having moved backwards and the front arm having moved forward. So once I had those 4 frames in place, I added 4 more frames in between the initial 4 frames to just make the animation a bit smoother. So I ended up in total with 8 frames, and in each of those new frames I created the pose that was exactly in the middle of the motion between the 2 frames around it. Here it can be very useful to use onion skinning, which is a feature that lets you see any of the previous or next frames of the animation with lowered opacity, so that you know exactly how the current pose needs to look like. So once I had my 8 frames of the animation in place, it was time to start detailing each of those frames. As you can see, I gave the character its medieval outfit, including the belt and the bag, and I made sure that the bag has some nice swinging movement that matches the movement of the front leg. So once those details were done, it was time to do some shading. As you can see, I was creating my color palette on the fly, so whenever I needed a darker or lighter tone of the existing colors, I just created them on the spot. In general, I gave the back arm and the back leg slightly darker tones than the front arm and the front leg, just to give a slight impression of depth to the image. And with the light coming from the left side of the image, in my case, I applied highlights to all those little details accordingly. And this is how the final animation looks like. Overall, I'm happy with how it turned out, but I also do still see some room for improvements. So what do you guys think? Do you have any suggestions how to further upgrade the animation? Also, I might use this guy for a future project, so this guy definitely needs a name. So let me know your suggestions down in the comments, and if you want to see some more animation on this channel, you can have a look at this flying saucer next.